tears forever flow. Could my zeal no anger know? These for sin could not atone. Thou must save, and thou alone. In my hand, O Christ, I bring, simply to thy cross I cling. While I draw this fleeting breath, when my eyes shall close in death, when I rise to worlds unknown, and behold beyond thy throne, Rock of ages, cleft for me, let me hide myself in thee.
Amen. I'm glad we can hide in him. Amen. 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 Hope everybody's doing okay. I guess everybody's not. I just heard silence, so. Still early. Yeah, that's a Peter. That's a Peter thing. So, we're going to continue our series, if I get everything to work properly here, on the names of the Lord. And so we're going to be going and looking at one here that's pretty common to everybody. And we're going to get into that. And we're going to make some cross references to a particular role in the church and why it should never be taken lightly. Never taken lightly. So we are indeed talking about the name of the Lord. And we're going to look at number 6 today is Jehovah Ra'ah. R-A-A-H, Ra'ah. The pronunciation would be R-A-W/A-W. So, Ra'ah. All right? Jehovah Ra'ah. And it's the Lord my shepherd. And so, again, A.W. Tozer says this: what comes into our minds when we think about God is the most important thing about us. Low views of God destroy the gospel for all who hold them. And so the names of God in the Old Testament, Jehovah Ra'ah. Jesus said in John chapter number 10, he said, I am the good shepherd giveth his life for the sheep. This is at the heart of this particular name for God, Jehovah Ra'ah, the Lord my shepherd. And so as we looked at this, the idea is let's begin to think of ourselves as sheep. And God uses that illustration a lot. How many of you are comfortable about the idea of being known as a sheep? Because there's not a lot of positives in this area. I mean, there are on one side. If you're into years ago, I was up north, and we had about 6 acres that I thought would be good for some sheep, and we had an unused barn right across the road. I said, hey, I might want to start getting into sheep, until I found out how much work it was going to be. It's nothing easy at all, and then I was looking at the different breeds, and there's certain breeds that would do no good up here, and there was only a couple of breeds that would probably do okay. And so really, I still have books that I have, and looking at that. But of all the positives about sheep, there's a few things that we know from the scriptures and from what others have said about sheep. Number one, this is kind of harsh, but they're described as being dumb, helpless, defenseless. Yes, sir. That's it. I mean, this is what we're talking about. They just, and they just kind of, there's other sides of it that are very positive, but, they are very trusting, as long as they're familiar with it. They have pretty good memories of face recognition. If they're taught early enough, you can even call them by their name, and they'll come based on that. So those aspects are pretty good about it. they do have a hard time recognizing what's good to eat and what's not good to eat. They tend to wander, which causes them to stray and get into problems. And they must be led to water. So with that in mind, that means that whoever's going to care for the sheep better have a good understanding of them, just like you were just alluding to, and they have to have a heart for these sheep, because these sheep can be somewhat problematic, you've got to be very mindful of where they are and what's happening. So, with that, let's look at some aspects of shepherds. So, if you take these scriptures, it gives you some ideas about some descriptives about what shepherds should be doing. So like out of Jeremiah 31, there's the idea they should be in the concept of gathering, always trying to gather. They should be in the concept of keeping or guarding. The word keep means to guard, always on watch, always making sure that they are cared for. They cause to lie down. That's interesting, isn't it? They have to cause them to lie down. They have to cause them to come to a place of rest. They have to go out before them, the shepherds, and they have to find good feeding areas for them. So that's just in general. There's more that we're going to look at, but we're going to look at it in a counter way. And so as I already indicated from John chapter number 10, where Jesus said, I am the good shepherd giveth his life for the sheep. So he's already qualifying what a good shepherd does, gives his life for the sheep. We know this from David. Remember, David is given responsibility as a son of Jesse. He's given, yes, a small flock, not a big flock, but something that's manageable. What does he have to do and why does he protect those sheep when he could have run? He's doing his father's business. He's recognizing that his father has given that responsibility. And what does God use to prepare him for Goliath? He had to face a lion and a bear, right? And so if you study those things, you begin to realize that those are not easy tasks. That's laying your life down, right? And he was doing it for his father's sheep. This is the picture that we have here with Jesus Christ. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd giveth his life for the sheep. But he that is a hireling, one for hire, and not the shepherd, whose own the sheep are not, seeth the wolf coming, and leaveth the sheep, and fleeth, and the wolf catcheth them, and scattereth the sheep. The hireling fleeth because he is a hireling, and cares not for the sheep. What does the hireling care for? The job, the money. The hireling, and he says, I am the good shepherd, Jesus says, and I know my sheep, and I am known of mine. As the Father knoweth me, even so I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. So, who's he speaking of in this context? Who are the hirelings that Jesus is now alluding to? He's alluding to the religious grouping of that day, the Pharisees. And he's saying, these are only in it for the power and the money and the profitability. That's what they're looking for. Now, he's saying it in a side way. Not all of them are that way. Nicodemus seemed to be a really decent fellow trying to come up and do the right things. But overall, Jesus was not happy with the Pharisees who were leading them. He called them hypocrites, right? And so he called them open sepulchres. And these were the leaders that were involved. The Pharisees, the scribes. He had issues with the scribes. He had issues with the Sadducees. So a lot of that. So let's talk basically the hirelings real quick. And we're looking at the contrast of a good shepherd. The Lord is my shepherd, so he's good. We know that. But we also know that in the concept of pastoral care and pasture, it's pastoral, it's pasture. That's the concept. In the pastoral care, there are some that we know are not so good. All right? And I'm not here to take a vote one way or the other on me. I'm just simply saying that we know that there are those that are in it for the wrong reasons. They shouldn't be doing it. Maybe they should never have been ordained, never qualified, and we have a real problem. One of the problems we have with pastoral care today is we have so many leaving ministry and so many going to different ministry other than pastoral care ministry that you have these big pockets where there's no pastors. So you have sheep scattered without a shepherd. You have churches without pastoral care. And yet it's so important in the Bible. God just refers to this over and over again about pastoral care. And we're going to get into a couple of passages in a second on that. So the problem I have today is when I look out and I'm really I was just talking to someone today, I think, and was reminded. I was just talking to Chris out in the parking lot. He had a question. We were talking about something and he brought it up. And I got talking about it'll be next month. It'll be 30 years since I was ordained. and Mom worshipped here, and my father-in-law orchestrated that. I was on staff at the church at the Baptist Temple in Holbrook, Mass. It was right around graduation time, and because my pastor from Ohio was going to be up, and so we did this duel, and I still have a picture in my office of the ordination. 30 years next month. Now, in those days, I was obviously green. I was really a novice. Now I'm one of the old guys. I go to a fellowship meeting here, a Baptist fellowship meeting here in this state, and some of you might, Aaron, or Josh Frost, and he has two brothers in ministry here. There's Dan and Aaron, and so Dan is up in St. Albans, and Aaron's down in Ira or just below Rutland, and then there's other guys, they're younger guys in ministry in the state, and I've been kind of going to monthly meetings to encourage. That's how we've gotten tied into camp, and we're doing youth camp with these guys. There are like 3 of us old fogies that show up. Everybody else is young, right? I'm part of that old group now, and it's interesting. But the reality is, I'm very thankful for these pastors that I know that are in the state, but we're running into issues all the time of churches not having pastors. So like in Hardwick, they've been without a pastor a long time. We know this church was without a pastor for on 2 occasions. I know at least a year and a half. So finding people to come and pastor is really hard. I'm on sites that every day almost there'll be a call for a need for a pastor somewhere, and there's just such a shortage. So, but the problem is that when there's such a shortage, we kind of compromise, and we start looking for pastors that really shouldn't be there, right? They're actually going to do worse. And I'll give you a case in point. I'm rambling, I know, but having been in the state of Vermont for now 20 years, this June I'll be 20 years here in Vermont, and knowing the state pretty well, where churches are don't have pastors. There was a church coming available up in Barton, and the Paragallas were there, and he felt like he needed to move on, and so he was going to move down to Connecticut. A guy came from Washington State. Now I thought to myself right away, why would anybody come from Washington State to a little church up in Barton to pastor? I don't know about you, but that set up red flares for me, right? And then I observed, and because we have qualifications to be a bishop, right? Those are pastors. There's qualifications. The guy came with his wife. He had a son, and the son was just a terror. He was about 10, 11 years old. He was a terror. And I said to Pastor Paragella, I said, you don't want him. I said, if he can't handle that, just one kid there, he can't handle that one. What's he going to do in the church? Now, Pastor Paragalla, as much as I loved him, he was desperate. Now, thankfully, he took my advice and said, okay, we won't do it. And eventually they were able to get another pastor to step in. But that's what you run into. When people come to Vermont, it's not always good. It's because they've been rejected everywhere else. And they're like, oh, I can get in at least in Vermont. Like, no. We got enough issues without that, right? So it's nothing to be taken lightly. So they're not owners. They're just wage seekers. Some of them just want the prestige. They just want to say they pastor a church. They want the power. They want whatever. They're just in for the wages. They will leave the sheep inside of the wolf. In other words, they do not have an ability to recognize the wolf. If they do, they are going to just let it go. Okay, it's okay, buddy. Be calm. And in the meantime, what are they doing? They're leaving the sheep to the wolf. So he leaves the sheep unprotected. He accepts the slaughter of the sheep by the wolf, and he careth not for the sheep. That's the hireling. So people who just want the money, you're usually the one hurting the flock, not necessarily helping the flock. Okay? So when we continue on then with this, there are 2 passages, and I'm going to share this because this is very important to me in this area of pastoral. There's really was a good friend of mine, and he doesn't consider me a friend, but I still consider him a friend. He was my pastor, and I think I've shared this with you. He's in jail right now, serving 10 years. Okay, he was my pastor, and he was a lord over them. It was very, very, very harsh, and soaked money out of them. And eventually, he was up in Canada. If I gave you the name and you put it into, you run it, his name, and it became national headlines when he was arrested, he and his wife, my pastor. And so I've loved him. And the irony of this, he's probably taught me more about details about pastoring, not the pastoral heart piece, but how to do things in the pastorate. Okay, he's probably been one of the number one people to show me a lot of things. But that being said, he had his kids eventually accused him of. He had 8 children. None of them stayed in church, and they began to accuse him of abuse. So that's what ended up putting him in jail. So he got 10 years for abuse up in Canada. When this started to come out, I called him and I as a friend, because we were very good friends. I mean, we went to the Philippines on 2 occasions. I've been up in his church many times speaking. He's helped me with a lot of things. And I began to hear things because of the closeness of my proximity as well as the closeness to the people in the church. And I began to call him up and I said, hey, I started to feel what's going on. Well, he started to clamp up, which is unlike anything he would ever do. He would always open up, and he had no problem telling me if there was a problem with a member in the church, right? But when I start to kind of probe in there, and he knew I was kind of coming into his area, he just clamped up, said nothing. So one day he started to get a little feisty with me, and he started to accuse me of some things, and I said, how do I know? I said, you tell me, how do I know you're not now fulfilling an Ezekiel 34 pastor or a Jeremiah 23 pastor? How do I know you're not now become that kind of pastor? Tell me. Because everything I'm hearing is showing differently. Now, here's why I would just give caution. Jesus was always okay with calling out those in the religious crowd because that's where he was. Paul goes to Peter's face and calls him out in a face-to-face confrontation in the book of Galatians. I don't think it's wise for members to necessarily always do that. Maybe you have to, but I definitely think a pastor should call out a pastor. Do you get where I'm going with that? I just definitely think that if there's something wrong, a pastor should have the right to call it out. And so I did. And I still, we were in Maine, Diana and I were in Maine in December, and on the way back, Diana said, I'm really concerned about Mrs. Pastor. And I said, well, we can reach out to their daughter. We know how to get a hold of her. And so on the way back, she did. But they're still very bitter, this couple. The sad thing is both Pastor and Mrs. Pastor went to separate jails for this. So both are in jail. All right. Now, I sit down with people like Chris, and I say, Chris, you're being developed in ministry right now. I'm just going to tell you, you're going to have that all over the place. It's going to be real easy to put your eyes on the ones that didn't do it, and you're going to forget the ones who stayed faithful to the Lord. I said, for every one that stands out as one who was not faithful, there will be dozens, if not hundreds, if not thousands that have been faithful. You just won't hear about them. You're only going to hear about the ones that were not faithful. Okay? And if I were to sit down and we were to have a discussion and an open forum, Mrs. Worship and myself would horrify you with the stories of good friends that we know that have just done some really, not just criminal stuff, I mean just heinous stuff, stupid stuff, right? Okay, they fell. But did not Paul say, all have forsaken me. There's only this one and this one and this one left. Demas hath loved this present world. So it's hard, it's trying, okay? And they're just people who just, one of the things about being in I'm just going to say this on the side. What happens in pastoral ministry is that you feel like you got to be an example. And so when things are hurting and things are problematic, you close it up. But if you have no outlet, you have no way of who to talk to, what to talk to, how to talk to. If you don't know how to go through that process, you really are susceptible to falling to almost anything. Okay, almost anything. And so the goal here is not to be too critical, but God is able to decide who he's going to chasten and who he's not. So in Ezekiel 34, verse 2, he goes to Ezekiel. He calls him the Son of Man. He said, prophesy against the shepherds of Israel. Prophesy and say unto them, thus saith the Lord God unto the shepherds, woe be to the shepherds of Israel that do not feed them, that do feed themselves, and should not the shepherds feed the flocks? So we see that what happens, one of the first things that shepherds do is they can get bitter, and they can start just saying, you know what, it's about me. I'm going to take mine first. That is the downward slide to a very bad place for everybody, the sheep and the shepherd. Okay? So with that, out of Ezekiel 34, these verses come forth from Ezekiel to the shepherds. He says, therefore, you shepherds, hear the word of the Lord. As I live, saith the Lord God, surely because my flock became a prey, and my flock became meat to every beast of the field, because there was no shepherd, neither did my shepherds search for my flock, but the shepherds fed themselves and fed not my flock. Therefore, O ye shepherds, hear the word of the Lord. This is the chastisement of God on the shepherds. Now, why can God come across it? Well, number one, he's God. We know that. But he is the Lord, our shepherd. He is the perfect example. He's the one that we as shepherds should model ourselves after, right? And so that's why he's coming through Ezekiel to speak to these shepherds, and he's going to let them have it. And so according to Ezekiel 34, verse 8, the sheep become prey as a result of the negligence and abuse of the shepherds. The shepherds only care for themselves. The wolves feed on the sheep, and God will smite these shepherds. So we can't go through the whole chapter, but this is why I said this to this particular pastor who's still dear friend of mine. I pray for him almost every day. I believe he will repent in jail. I do believe that when he finally gets out, they'll hopefully, if we're still around, meaning that we're somehow able to connect. I think we'll have a good time and he'll spill his heart as to how that all happened. But in the text in Ezekiel 34, the shepherds feed themselves, they feed not the flock, they do not strengthen the diseased, they do not heal the sick, they do not bind the broken, they did not bring again those that were driven away, and neither sought they the lost. They are scattered because there is no shepherd. And these are the words of Jesus. Remember Jesus in the New Testament, he says, with compassion, he says, look, these are sheep without a shepherd. Now, he's making a reference back into this Old Testament. And anyone who knew the Scriptures, and we now who have the full computation of all the Scriptures, we know what he's saying. How did they get, if they are truly the sheep of Israel, they are the sheep of God. How did it happen? The religious leaders let it happen. That's how it happened. And so when we look at Christianity today, that's why you'll hear me say over and over again, we can blame our government all we want. No, the government is a reflection of what the people want. And if you go into Jeremiah, we were going to see that the pastors caved because of the pressure coming from the people. And that's why Jeremiah is left out singular and attacked, because he's the one standing for righteousness, right? But what happened is the pastors did not stay faithful to God and the truth of the Scriptures. Now, some of it is ignorance. Sadly, there's a lot of people coming up through ministry that just are not mentored well. They just get this degree on the wall, and they're like, okay, let's go do it. And it's like, no, man. That's like, you handing someone who has no experience building a house and say, okay, here's a nail and here's a hammer. Let's go at it. We've lightly approached the importance of pastoral leadership in this country. We just look at it as it's just a job. No, it's not. It's a calling of God. That's why so many are bivocational. They're working. I worked 22 years, 100 hours a week, bivocational, working a job to fulfill the needs of my family and still try to see a church grow or be started. So we started a work in the inner city of Boston. We took a work up in northern part of Vermont and replanted it, as we would say, in this, and then we came here. Okay, so that time from after our ministry there at Baptist Temple, we were basically in church planning. And that's what we call bivocational. And if you find a guy that's bivocational, he's willing to work, support his family, and still pastor a church, you found someone unique. Because they're not getting paid for that. They're just given. They're just doing it because God's call is on them. And that's what they want to do. So with that, we move on here then with this from Ezekiel 34, verse 11. For thus saith the Lord God, behold, I, even I, both search for my sheep and seek them out. So he gives us from Ezekiel 34:11 down through Ezekiel 34:16. He says, I'm going to show you what I'm going to do as the good shepherd, the Lord my shepherd. And so I made a list here to make it easy from the Lord my shepherd from Ezekiel 34. He's going to search out his sheep. He's going to search my sheep. He's going to seek them out. He's going to deliver them out of the places that they've wandered to. He's going to bring them to their own land. He's going to feed them. He's going to cause them to lie down and find rest. He's going to bind the broken. He's going to strengthen the sick. He's going to destroy the shepherds who are made fat for feeding upon the sheep or feeding from the sheep. And he's going to destroy the shepherds that seized upon the sheep. This is really important. This is why I say this in just understanding that a true shepherd of the Lord, a true pastor of the Lord is going to be out there and is going to be very vulnerable to the attack of many. Okay? That's why I said if a pastor doesn't have a way to unleash some of that and find a positive way to do it, they're going to have problems. This is how it's going to go. Okay? So with that in mind, what we have here then is I have watched where God, one thing I tell people all the time, and it's this: God will take care of his pastor. If he's not what he should be, God will take care of him one way or the other. And we know this over and over again. So if you go over to Revelation chapter number 2, this is what stood out to me. He's talking to the angel, which is angelos, which is the Greek for messenger. And he says to the messengers, the angelos, the angels of the churches, the 7 churches. See, he's speaking to the pastor there. He's not speaking to the church. The church gets it, but who's he speaking to? Because he says grammatically, he says to the angel, angelos, messenger. So are we saying it's an angel from heaven? Well, if you read the context, he's criticizing. He says, these are some good things I like about what you've done, but here, let me show you some things you didn't do right. Do you get what I'm saying? Would he say that to an angel in heaven? No. So the translators put angel there, angelos meaning messenger, just keeping it vague, but there's only one messenger I know to the church, and who is it? It's the pastor, it's the preacher. So he's criticizing. He has 7. There's only one that has no criticism, the pastor or the angel for Philadelphia. And others are really good. But if you follow the pronouns, again, using the King James, he speaks to the church, to the pastor at Ephesus, and he says, if you do not rectify this, I will take the candlestick from you. What's the candlestick? The candlestick's the church. He says, if you do not rectify, he says, get back to your first love. And he was busy. This pastor at Ephesus was very busy, doing a lot of things. But what should have been his first love? God and his word. He said, you better get back to that, and if you don't, I'm going to take it from you. And so when you begin to realize that God calls, but God is the one that can raise up or he can put down. And when you accept the call of God, it's not a job. It's not one of those things where I can just kind of say, I quit. No, I'm compelled. Lord, you let it. I can't leave until you say otherwise, right? And so it's really important that we understand that. So he takes care of the shepherds that aren't doing what they should do. And we go to Jeremiah 23, verses 1 and 2. He says, woe be unto the pastors that destroy and scatter the sheep of my pasture, saith the Lord. Therefore, thus saith the Lord God of Israel, against the pastors that feed my people. You have scattered my flock. And he goes on later on, and he says in verse 2, he goes, and driven them away, and have not visited them, which means coming close. And the word bishop, by the way, brings this concept. What you might look at the terms and say, why don't you call me a bishop? Well, number one, I wouldn't want it. But the word bishop means someone who has the ability to come in close and examine closely. Okay? So you understand if there's a flock and a shepherd sitting up on a hill like this, and he looks out, he already has a concept of who his sheep are and where they should be, right? But let's say he's seeing one that doesn't quite look quite right, or something doesn't seem quite right. What's he going to do? And if he has under shepherds, that's one thing. They'll maintain this, or he'll send them down. But the idea of the bishop is he comes in close and does a self-examination. What's wrong with this one, right? And that's the idea of visiting and bishoping. And sometimes that means there has to be some things done to rectify what's ever happening with that sheep. And it could be that sheep is eating something they shouldn't be eating and doing something they shouldn't be doing, and that's why he has a rod. He just taps it, right? Moves it, mushes it. He could, if he has a dog, a sheepdog, he could send it after it, right? The goal here, though, is the shepherd has to stop the sheep from doing something that's harmful or doing something that's going to create more harm, right? That's the idea behind bishop. That's the idea behind visiting, examining, caring for. And so sometimes that's the problem with the pastor and the sheep, and sometimes even with God. We blame God, the Lord, the shepherd, the Lord my shepherd. Well, how dare you do that? No, it's probably his mercy that's kept you from doing something, right? I say this in love, and as you've heard me say, one of the things I'm very concerned about with as my kids get older is finding the right spouses, right? And so I took my daughters out to breakfast this morning, and right away one of them just brings up, Dad, what do you do about this? Every guy, we're running into has this. And I said, well, and I went into the whole spiel about it, right? But the fact that what we're getting to is we've got to give them the best guidance we can, and I've got to do the best I can to guide them to it, the right decisions, so that the flock stays healthy going down the road, right? And so we're in a day and age where it's really hard to find good men. And so then if you can't find good men, guess what you're going to have trouble finding later? Good pastors. Because they have to meet certain qualifications to become a pastor, right? And so behold, I will visit upon you the evil of your doing, saith the Lord, and I will gather the remnant of my flock and out of the countries whither I have driven them, and I will bring them again to the folds, and they shall be fruitful and increase, and I will set up shepherds over them, which shall feed them, and they shall fear no more, nor be dismayed, neither shall they be lacking, saith the Lord. So in that statement, we learn a few things here. Bad shepherds are going to instill fear, which is going to result in dismay. So what's the idea behind dismay? Because of fear. What happens when someone is shocked and feared and dismay comes on? What happens? They lock up, right? We don't know what to do. And then they become what's called confounded. So you follow confounded, you follow dismay in the Old Testament, you're always going to tie it to fear. It's always what the result of fear is. So if he says dismay, then what's happened is the shepherd he's allowed them to be fearful. Now I'm going to say this, this Friday we will, God willing, be finalizing the adoption of Keegan and Logan. But what I'm going to tell you is they have come out, all those three that we've adopted have come out of trauma. And they lock up. You can see the cogs in their mind just lock up, and they don't know what to do. That's what I'm talking about dismay and confoundedness. And I can only tell you it happened because of trauma and fear. I hope one day those things will be loosened up and they won't lock up and thankfully I don't see it lock up as often. But that's another part of, can I just tell you, that's one of my burdens, my passions about what we do at the school and what we're doing down here in Little Flock. I cannot tell you how many kids we're getting out of trauma now. And they're locking up. But in our system, they're thriving. Why? Because there's a safety, right? And we're willing to go. And we're willing to work with them as a good shepherd, like the Lord our shepherd. We're willing to help the diseased, bind the broken, feed them with something good. Encourage them to rest. I don't know how many times I've had to say to teachers over the last 2 years with COVID, it's okay if we don't go through the curriculum. It's okay. They can make it up later. We want these kids to be happy. We want these kids to feel safe. We want them to get up in the morning and say, I can't wait to go to school. Let me share another side of that, what taught me down through, I know I'm rambling a little bit. But when I worked in public schools, I was working as a BI a couple of times, behavior interventionist. They didn't call it that back then, but that's what it was. Do you know there was 2 things I observed about the kids I worked with? Number one, they never were sick. They always came to school. And I was like, man, these are the tough ones. Why can't I get a day off, right? Why can't I have an easy day? No, they never miss school. Why is that? Because school was safe. It was the safest place they could be, was in school. And then I found another observation. If they're going to act up, they're going to act up on 2 days out of the week, Monday and Friday, or right before a big holiday, because the anxiety was starting to build because they were going to go home. And then when they came back, the traumas and the fears were all reinforced, and we had to kind of settle them back down on Monday. Dinah's job at Berrytown was to prepare lunch bags for those kids they had identified that were going into some risk on the weekends. Do you know how many she had to do every weekend when she was up over here at Berrytown? 110. Those are children at risk. She tells me Berry City had to do the same thing, but they had to do nearly 300. So you're talking that the school knows, the district knows that these are kids at risk. They can't do anything about it, right? So my point in that is, when we look at the shepherd here, they're instilling fear, they're resulting in dismay. It's because the sheep are starving. They're starving for something. They need something, okay? And that's why when we think of the Lord, our shepherd, I love how it goes there. The Lord is my shepherd from Psalm 23. What does it say? The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He knows exactly what I need. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. Isn't that what we just read in the other scripture? He makes me rest. To the point that he's going to insist I learn how to rest. He's going to go on and he says, he leadeth me beside still waters. Nothing that's going to scare me. Stillness. That's what his goal is for us. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. And yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil. Think about that. Remember, we're talking about sheep are very skittish. They tend to stray. But they're so confident in their shepherd, they follow him through the darkest places. Think about that with me as well. You who have had to go out onto your fields or into your lots, wherever you are at night. If I go out at night and, for instance, Barron's there, all right? Now, he has a good scent. He can follow, right? But think about a multitude, if there are a bunch of sheep or they're cattle, whatever they were. But since our topic is sheep, how would they know how to follow? All they had to do is hear his voice. They didn't have to see him. They just have to hear his voice. They have to know his word, right? And so as he's speaking the word, they follow through that darkness. Though I go through the valley of the shadow of death. And notice the idea of the shadow of death. I mean, he could have just said darkness. He could have just said shadow. But he said the shadow of death. Indicating that this isn't just the idea of darkness. This is the idea of what we all fear. We all fear death. I don't know too many that don't. Someone say, well, I'm confident I'll be saved. I know, that God's grace will be sufficient. But many of us have seen death. We don't like the idea of death. He says this is just the shadow of death. This is the feeling of death. Some of you maybe have been close to death. Either experiencing or you've seen it. And he's saying in this text, by the way, I'm at least 2 slides down. I don't know if you're there. Tim? Okay. And he said, and David says, or the psalmist says, David says, I will fear no evil. Why don't I fear? For thou art with me, thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. The Lord my shepherd, Jehovah Ra'ah. You're there. You're going to keep the wolf away. You're going to continue to make sure I'm eating right and doing what's necessary. You will supply my need. Is that what God says? Did not God say in Matthew, Jesus said in Matthew chapter 6, give no thought for the morrow? He said, don't worry about your food. Don't worry about your clothing. Did he not say through the Apostle Paul, my God shall supply your every need? It's what it is. He shall supply your every need. The Lord, my shepherd, my protector. And he goes on to tell me there, for thou art with me, thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. He's my comfort. He's the one, my provider. He's my protector. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil. My cup runneth over. I am so blessed. My enemies are right there, and I don't even fear what they can do to me. Because I have a good shepherd that knows exactly how to keep them where they have to be. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. And if I can end it up with, you've heard me say this on a couple of occasions, but with this idea of look at that, the wording again. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life. That means that I'm here and something's behind me. As I follow the Lord my shepherd, what's happening? Goodness is falling behind me. Something good is happening behind me. Now, I look at it as heritage. I look at it as blessing upon those that are following in the same pathway. We're helping that pathway, right? I mean, it's always interesting. I drive through Vermont. You've seen them too, and all of a sudden you'll see a trail just go up through the woods somehow. And I always ask myself the question, how was that started? How did that trail happen? Was that deer? Was it cows? Was it logging? How did that trail happen? It's just there. Where did it come from? And so think about sheep that just continue to follow the same trails, up the mountain to feed, come down to the valley, up the mountain, down the valley. We're leaving good markers. And there's going to be blessing to follow. And then goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Boy, I love that part. Where's the God leading me? He's leading me through some really hard times, hard places. But where's the destination? The house of the Lord forever. The Lord my shepherd. He's going to take care of my enemies. He's going to take care of your enemies. He's going to continue to provide and protect. He wants you to learn to rest. He's not into driving sheep. We don't drive sheep unless it's something we have to do to keep them safe. But he wants us to rest. He wants us to eat well, drink well. He wants us to know that even though the enemy might be out there howling and doing whatever, it's okay as long as I'm following the shepherd. And what is the destination? The best place of all. The house of God, the place of God, the presence of God, right? And so, yes, number one, and let me wrap it with this. There are going to be a lot of shepherds you hear, and you have over time, heard a lot of bad things about people in ministry. I'm telling you, because I'm in it, I hear things, sadly, more than I ever really want to ever hear about them. But that one thing, remember, don't get into the Elijah concept where Elijah says, I'm the only one. And what did God say? Come on, man, I got 6,000, 7,000 haven't even bowed their knee. They're bowing their knee. They won't bow to Baal. Think about that. Basically, Israel's about the size of Rhode Island. And God's saying, what are you talking about? And I'm thinking to myself, Elijah, there's 6,000 or 7,000 in a size area about Rhode Island, and you don't know who they are. But God has preserved who they are. But it's easy to think that, everybody's doing it. No, it's the other way. It's the other way. problem we do have, though, is we're not, and so that's why the Lord says there's a harvest, but we don't have enough laborers. We need to be praying for laborers. We need to be training. That's what is exciting about what's going on downstairs. That's what's exciting about what I can do in lives like Tim and Chris and others, and just try to encourage them to keep on, because there's one day they're going to be the old guy like me, and they're going to be fellowship meetings, and there's going to be other younger guys coming up through the ranks. Think about how many, there's a plaque downstairs, I think, has a bunch of pastors that have been pastoring here. It's right on the wall down at the bottom of the steps. Think about all those that have come and they've done their duty. Some were here, I noticed some were here at not more than a year or so. Some were here a couple years. Obviously, Albert was here, I think, 47 years. Think about, Pastor Emery and what he was doing, pastoring a couple of churches to keep things going. And thankfully, a lot of these churches are still in existence today. There's a lot of work to be done. So the Lord our shepherd, he's our example, and we need to be praying for more shepherds, under shepherds, that will follow his example and do what has to be done. All right. Prayer requests.